a couple hours ago, and had the opportunity to preview for us some of his concerns and some of his thoughts on what's going on with Iran. While I know everyone is eating, I will not talk too much about Iran's leadership because I don't want you to lose your appetite. But he infuriates me, and it's very hard for me to keep my tongue in place when it comes to speaking of him. So I will bring up someone who knows a whole lot more about what is happening in Iran and with the borders. Dr. Shetinitz is someone that served Israel in so many different capacities over the years as chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. He's been chairman of the Subcommittee for Intelligence and Secret Service. He is so well known for his writings also. He's written books of philosophy, the most popular philosophy books perhaps in Israeli history. He is not just an author, but he is a fine speaker and someone who studies his craft. Let us welcome Dr. Yuval Shetinitz.
Thank you. Good evening. I would like to thank again the Benny Davis family for this fascinating possibility, fascinating event, and for me the pleasure to speak to you at this event. And I would like also to thank member of Knesset and former education minister of the State of Israel, Limor Livnat, who is sitting here. She is one of the most competent Israeli politicians, but today she really surprised me because politicians are quite reluctant to suggest somebody else to speak instead of them. And actually, Limor Livnat was supposed to speak tonight, but she insists that since the Iranian issue is so important, that I will be here on the stage to elaborate and to discuss the very serious issue of the Iranian threat. Let me start by raising an interesting question or hypothesis. Will the potential failure to prevent the nuclearization of Iran might be, in historical perspective, compared or parallel to the failure of the world to intercept the Third Reich arming in the 1930s? Well, we cannot answer in advance. After all, future might tell us that nuclear ayatollahs might become more responsible to their people's fate than to their own apocalyptic face or vision. But it might be also the other way around. And in any case, I do believe that risk management vis-à-vis the Iranian threat should consider not just the raw desire of the mullahs to obtain the bomb, but we should assess as well the real nature and scope and spatial approach of the Iranians to their nuclear force building. And this is usually ignored by people in the West, in Israel, in the United States, in Europe. If we compare the Iranian force building, nuclear force building, to that of other countries like North Korea, Pakistan, India, we shall discover significant differences. On the one hand, India and Pakistan, and maybe North Korea as well, and I am saying maybe because it seems that the first nuclear test was a failure, they already obtained the bomb. But on the other hand, although the Iranians are still trying to produce the bomb, they are still not there. If you examine the scale of the Iranian nuclear industry from the outset, you see that they are building completely different nuclear industry than that of North Korea, for example, or Pakistan, or even India. India and Pakistan build their nuclear facilities in order to enable the production of few nuclear bombs per decade. Iran is already building its nuclear industry to be able to produce in the future hundreds of nuclear warheads per decade. I'll give you just one example. The Iranians already admitted that in one site in Kashan or Natanz, they intend to produce and deploy 54,000 centrifuges for uranium enrichment. Of course, the regime is saying that this will be used only for electricity, only for civilian purposes. In a public hearing, in an open hearing on the Senate floor in 2003, a joint hearing to the American-Israeli Joint Committee on Defense, experts from the administration, from John Bolton's office, and also from independent research centers, estimate that those 54,000 centrifuges will be able to produce, if they will be utilized for fissile material rather than for electricity, between 20 to 25 bombs annually. And this do not include yet the plutonium production in the huge heavy water reactor, nuclear reactor, that is currently under construction in Natanz. Such large stockpile of nuclear warheads, and it will take time to be there for the Iranians, is not needed only to threaten Israel or the Middle East, but in order to be able to threaten the entire Western world. If we analyze the Iranian missiles program, the same questions arises. If I compare it to the missile program of both India and Pakistan, you see the difference. India and Pakistan build ballistic missiles to cover each other, to threaten each other, to deter each other. This is a regional nuclear build-up, a regional approach. The Iranians are looking far beyond. They already have the capacity to threaten the entire Middle East, including, of course, Israel, with their Shihab-3 missiles. They are now working very hard on the Shihab-4 missiles that in few years' time will be able to threaten Western Europe. And the next generation, the Shihab-5 missiles, will have the range of the United States of America East Coast, including New York, Washington, and even Savannah. To this, you have to add the very unusual revelation by the Ukraine current Prime Minister about the illegal sale and delivery of between 10 to 20 cruise missiles that are nuclear capable from the Ukraine to Iran in the 90s. So they are dealing not just with ballistic missiles, long-range ballistic missiles, but also with cruise missiles based on those missiles that they obtain illegally from Ukraine, and those missiles have also sea launching capability, which means that they can put them on a ship and launch them from the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans. So, to conclude this point, if we combine the magnitude of Iran's nuclear industry with their far-reaching missile program, what we see is a global power in the making. And this is totally different from what we see in India, Pakistan, or North Korea. Which means that if Iran will become nuclear, then we are speaking not about few bombs, but about something from entirely different dimension. I want to say a few words about the implications of this. And I think that it's clear that even without the eruption of nuclear war or a third world war, the implications are extremely dangerous. The first implication of the nuclearization of Iran will be that all American and Western interests in the Gulf and all other efforts are doomed to fail. Nuclear Iran will be able to ratchet up its regional influence and to eject or to expel US and Britain from the Gulf, and also in the future, in some point in the future, to dominate Iraq and to form a Shiite crescent going from Iran through Iraq and Syria to the Mediterranean, and by this encircling Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and Arabia, Saudi. The second extremely dangerous implication will be that other similar regimes in the region, other authoritarian regimes, and the usual suspects are Egypt, Libya, Syria, Saudi Arabia, will follow in the same dangerous direction. Libya just dismantled its nuclear facilities a few years ago, but in different circumstances, it can resume it. Egypt just announced about a plan to construct 3 nuclear plants for electricity, and this is also a cause for alarm. A world that capitulates to the Iranian bold violation of the NPT, of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, will stand helpless if other similar regimes in the region will try to compete with Iran in the nuclear arena. And of course, there might be other implications, but we cannot rule out also the possibility of something similar to a world war between Iran and the Western world. After all, who could predict with confidence in the 1930s that the rearmament of Nazi Germany would result in such a global catastrophe in the 1940s. History is not an accurate science, and it's impossible to give accurate predictions. Some compare the Iranians to the Soviet Union, with which the West succeed to create detente and mutual deterrence. And some compare Iran to Nazi Germany, which became so dangerous and devastated the world. Who can tell? It's very difficult to tell, but I think that those people, those statesmen who calm themselves by referring to the rationality of the Ayatollahs and to the aspiration of the Iranians for economic prosperity, sound today more and more like those in the 1930s who calmed themselves by referring to the rationality of Hitler and the will of the German people to proceed with their economic prosperity. Sometimes such things work, and sometimes they fail to save the world. In any case, the public commitment of Ahmadinejad to rid the Middle East from Jewish or Israeli presence just strengthens the analogy to Hitler's commitment to rid Europe from Jewish presence. It is too similar to ignore. And the conviction of the Ayatollahs that the Western world and the Western civilization is the source of all evil, and that the United States and the Western world is the eternal enemy of Islam, also convince us at least that we cannot ignore also the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario, of course, is that the current clash of civilization that do exist between the Muslim world, or at least large part of the Muslim world, and the Western world might have a very dangerous nuclear dimension that sooner or later will bring also catastrophic results. What can be done about it? So first I want to exclude or to explain what will not do. The international community will not solve the problem. Actually, the UN and the international community last year succeeded to prove their inefficiency to such a level that I'll tell you something. The Iranians even stopped enjoying the game, the cat and the mouse game. In the past they enjoyed it, this cat and mouse game vis-a-vis the UN. Now they are not enjoying it anymore, it's not interesting anymore. The only solution can come from the real leader of the free world, which is the United States of America. And if, and I'm saying this despite my very strong admiration to the current leadership of the United States, and for its brave decision to go to the war on terrorism, to the global campaign against terrorism. If history will discover, or if it will become evident in the future, that this leadership, who succeeded to be bogged down, to get bogged down in full-scale war in Iraq, to save the world from virtual chemical weapons, failed at the same time to save the world from a real nuclear threat in next-door Iran, and maybe from the prospect of nuclear world war between Islam and the West, this will be extremely odd. Many people ask if what can be done if not the international community. It's clear that political isolation and even economic sanctions will not be enough to convince the Iranians to give up. It is too important for them. And rightly so. Their aim is to become global nuclear power, and this is, from their point of view, so important from historical Islamic perspective that they shouldn't give it up, and they are ready to suffer some pressure, even some sanctions. Is it possible to destroy the Iranian nuclear project? The answer is in the positive. A nuclear industry is not a high-tech industry. It's a heavy chemical industry. And think about heavy industry here in the United States, chemical industry or car industry. Think about the Chrysler company, for example. You cannot take such an industry and put it deep enough underground in order to make it totally immune to any kind of airstrike. A massive, accurate airstrike can deal with any kind of heavy industry, and it's impossible to turn it to make it completely secured or immune from air power. Is it the only chance to stop the Iranian project? Maybe and maybe not. But if it's possible at all, if there is chance to cause Iran to change its mind and to seriously dismantle or at least seriously postpone their nuclear project, it is only by the threat of brute force. The only example that we can learn from is Libya. When Gaddafi decided to dismantle his nuclear project, he didn't do so because of political pressure. He was anyhow isolated before. He didn't do so because of economic pressure. We know why he did so. He did so because after the war in Iraq, when US and Britain intelligence discovered and the US Navy intercepted the ship that was bringing centrifuges from Malaysia to Libya, and it was impossible anymore to hide or to lie about the
of defeating the state of Israel, but more than that, defeating the West and imposing what they call new caliphate, or nation of Islam, as they call it, had nothing with the Israeli existence. But they believe that on the way to defeat the West, Israel should be annihilated. And this is the case with the other ideologies, like Al-Qaeda ideology, led by Osama bin Laden, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, Sunni Wahhabi ideology, emerged in the Sunni Wahhabi madrasas in Saudi Arabia and today in Pakistan and some other places, calling to impose Islam all over the world, to create a new caliphate, nation of Islam. At the very beginning, they didn't mention the state of Israel. Today, in the last 2 years, we are mentioned in their declarations, videotapes, statements, because they feel that like we are weak and they can deal with us, they can approach us. And again, they didn't emerge because of the Israeli-Arab or Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this is the case of the Muslim Brotherhood, which Hamas is part of it. Emerged in the 30s of the 20th century, Israel didn't exist. And when Khaled Mashal, in his victorious speech last February in Damascus Mosque, said, "The nation of Islam will sit at the throne of the world, and the West will be full of remorse," he didn't mention the Palestinian people. He was speaking about the nation of Islam. This is the Islamic expression, Ummah al-Islam. All the world should become Muslim. Those who will be ready to convert themselves, the infidels, like Jewish, Christians, Buddhists, non-Muslims, will be ready to convert themselves, will be saved. The other will be killed by sword, by jihad, by the sacred war, to impose Islam. And he didn't mention the Palestinian in this victorious speech. He spoke about the nation of Islam. And he didn't speak about Israel. He spoke about the West. The West will be full of remorse. President Ahmadinejad, just last week, told the Europeans that they might be full of remorse if they support Israel. Like he told President Bush in his 18-page letter to President Bush, which had been ignored here. Actually, he recommended the president to convert to Islam. Otherwise, he will be full of remorse. He means what he says, and he says what he means. Bearing in mind what Member of Knesset Yuval Shetinitz said earlier about the Iranian threat, yes, they are determined to acquire military nuclear capability in order to be able to impose Islam in our region and all over the world. Today, by terrorism, by undermining moderate regimes around us, like in Jordan, in Egypt, in the Persian Gulf, blackmailing the Saudi Arabian regime, thinking about this nightmare of Iranian nuclear, probably they will dare to do more, even by dirty bombs with proxies, or more than that. Actually, this is not just a threat for the state of Israel. Israel geographically is on the front line. Yes, we fight this war and we are on the front line. In the last summer, we were engaged in military campaigns on two fronts. Gaza, at the end of June, after the Hamas provocation, the abduction of the soldier, killing 2 other soldiers, and Hezbollah provocation in the beginning of July, abducting the soldiers and killing other soldiers. on our soil, on our sovereign soil. These two military campaigns were part of the war between radical Islam and the West. Hezbollah and Hamas were the proxies. Iran was the mastermind. Syria was a facilitator. They couldn't say that they launched a war from the Gaza Strip because of occupation. We do not occupy anymore the Gaza Strip. They couldn't say that they launched the war from Lebanon because of occupation. We don't have military presence in Lebanon since May 2000. The root cause of this war is not occupation. The root cause of this war is the ambition, the aspiration, the strategic goal of these radical Islamists, or even, to be more accurate, Islamofascists, to wipe Israel off the map by attrition war, by other means, on the way to defeat the West. And the West, generally speaking, is sleeping. I'm not talking about the leadership here. I found here, in the last year, full awareness of the threat in the administration. Let's be more accurate, in the highest level of the administration. I'm not talking about the bureaucracy. Europe is in coma. Western like-minded people, even in Israel, are sleeping. Prefer to ignore the threat, to postpone the confrontation for the next day, for the next week, for the next year, for the next generation. But the confrontation is inevitable. For those in the West who want to survive, to go on living our way of life, to keep our culture, to keep our values, and not to give up. This is a clash between civilizations. It's a clash between cultures. It is a clash between values. All of them, either in Tehran, or in Beirut, Hezbollah, or in Gaza, Hamas, or in Pakistan, Osama bin Laden, or the Muslim Brotherhood, all over the Middle East. They prefer to sanctify death and not life. They do not consider human rights, not talking about, of course, human life. They do not consider knowledge. They prefer ignorance. They deny accountability, personal accountability, and the leaders' accountability. They blame the United States as a great Satan, Israel as a small Satan, now Europe is a medium Satan, for their miseries. They are not accountable for their poverty situation and so forth. And they blame us, they incite their people to be ready to be killed as martyrs, as shaheeds, from the kindergarten, to kill as many infidels as they can in order to defeat the West. And this is a war, actually World War III, that we are already engaged in. What should be done? As Westerns are sleeping and are confused, we need a wake-up call in the West, either in Israel and all over the free world. We have to educate ourselves, our own people, to understand the threat we are facing. We have to consolidate our national resolve. It is not anymore post-nationalism, post-Zionism. In order to survive, yes, we have to consolidate our national resolve. Here in the United States, in Europe, they prefer another way, and in Israel as well. We have to strengthen our confidence and our faith in our past and its righteousness. I was dealing with it as the chief of staff of the IDF. I met ignorant soldiers, 18, 19, 20 years old, with no idea about Jewish heritage, about Jewish history, about the history of the State of Israel. Not talking about Jewish values. Not talking about Zionist ideas. We should deal with it in order to survive. We need clarity at that time. Clear understanding of the situation, not confusing ourselves or being ready to be confused, deceived, deluded by their propaganda. In the last year, I had the opportunity to meet American students in the campuses. In many cases, it was an opportunity to meet Arab and Palestinian students with their posters. War criminal, Jenin massacre, occupation, apartheid, all these kind of fabrications. And as I was saying them, what are you talking about Jenin massacre? Do you know what did happen in Jenin? I was there. You haven't been there. But, you know, it's a good propaganda. Occupation is another word to manipulate Western like-minded people. According to my understanding and knowledge, the Jewish leadership since the dawn of Zionism was ready to any territorial compromise. In 1937, the Jewish leadership was ready to the Peel Commission proposal. The Palestinian leadership refused. In 1947, it was the United Nations partition plan, which is Jewish leadership again accepted. The Palestinian leadership refused. In the year 2000, it was an Israeli partition plan proposal. Prime Minister Barak is the outcome of Oslo Agreement, put on the table the partition of the land in order to reach a final settlement, the end of conflict, by the two-state solution idea. And Arafat initiated the war. And it happened in 1947, it happened in the 1930s. The Palestinian reaction for any partition plan was a war. So what are you talking about? The root cause is not the occupation of the land that we took in the Six-Day War, in our defensive war. The root cause is your reluctance to recognize our right to exist as a Jewish independent state. And if you mean by occupation, the occupation of the land of Israel for the Mediterranean Sea, to the Jordan River, like Hamas is saying clearly, and Arafat said it, but not clearly, not loudly, I'm going to fight you. You are not ready for the two-state solution, so what you are talking about? And then they use another manipulation, apartheid, because of South African precedent. And they mean the fence, the security fence. There are many people here who were in the decision-making process. Our government didn't want the fence. It was the outcome of the terror attacks. And one Palestinian was right when he told me in Abu Dis, I was traveling as a chief of staff along the fence, he was shouting from far away, tell all the world that the architect of the fence is Yasser Arafat. You are talking about apartheid? Unfortunately, we are ready to be manipulated. And in certain cases, we prefer to deceive ourselves and to delude ourselves. In the last decade in Israel, we ought to believe that we were just about to reach peace. And we just should go an extra mile, another territorial concession, in order to appease the Palestinians and to reach peace and tranquility. And it didn't work. And there are still people, even in Israel, who prefer to delude ourselves and to deceive themselves and to manipulate and to delude ourselves about this idea. We need also moral clarity. When it comes to this type of warfare that the IDF is engaged today, the international community should say very clearly and loudly that there is no tolerance for those rogue regimes and terror organizations who use their own civilians as human shield and attack deliberately our civilians. In September 11, in London, in Madrid, and of course in Kiryat Shmona and Haifa in the last summer. But the United Nations Secretary General, instead of condemning and criticizing Hezbollah, the Lebanese government, which should be held accountable, Syria and Iran, those who provided the weapons to Hezbollah, those who financed Hezbollah, those who encourage and push Hezbollah to provoke attacks against the State of Israel. The Secretary General of the United Nations preferred to condemn and criticize Israel for killing Lebanese civilians. And I can tell you about our rules of engagement. For us, killing civilians, it's a failure, not like in their side, killing our civilians, it's success. But in many cases, we don't have choice. What could we do in the last war when Hezbollah decided to position the Fajr rockets in family houses? In Hezbollah activist family houses, in the villages, in the highly populated urban areas in South Lebanon. They had family house with a kitchen, with living room, with children's room, with rocket room. What could we do with it? We should be condemned and criticized. This is moral clarity. And of course, we should have clear strategy. So when I'm talking about clarity, it's clear understanding of the situation, moral clarity, and clear strategy. As the international world order is challenged by rogue regimes and organizations, Western should be unified to confront them politically, economically, and militarily. At the end of the military campaign in Lebanon, Resolution 1701 didn't mention Iran and Syria. It was so clear, so obvious, that Iran and Syria were involved in this war. We absorbed the 220-millimeter rockets, the most devastating, Syrian-made. Anti-tank guided weapons supplied from Russia to Syria, provided by Syria to Hezbollah. Fajr rockets, Iranian-made. C-802 coast-to-sea missile, Chinese-made, provided by Iran to Hezbollah. And the United Nations Security Council, in its resolution, didn't mention Iran and Syria. If this kind of rogue regime can get away without paying price, without being punished, without being sanctioned, the international world order is useless. And it should be the Western interest to keep the world order, not to allow their intention to blur boundaries between combatant and non-combatants by killing our civilians and using their civilians as human shield, not allowing rogue regimes to support, to harbor, to equip, to finance terror organizations. But the United Nations and the West are keeping silent. Today, without confronting Iran, there is no chance to stabilize the Middle East. There is no chance to stabilize the situation in Iraq. There is no chance to stabilize the situation in Lebanon with UNIFIL, with the Lebanese armed forces. No chance without confronting Iran. And this is a nuclear issue, and this is a terror issue, and this is the Iranian intention to undermine moderate regimes in our region and to gain hegemony, to gain power and to dominate the region. Iran has become the center of gravity of the problem and the potential solution for any stability in the Middle East. Those who deny the political and economic confrontation today, like Russia, China, and others, actually promote the military option. In one way or another, the Iranian project, nuclear project, should be stopped. And by avoiding any sanctions, we are going step by step to the military confrontation. To my mind, it depends when and how. The Syrian regime should be punished. Again, accountability. He sent Mujahideen to kill coalition troops, to include Americans in Iraq. I heard a Syrian guy in Washington in the last year. We had a meeting in the Washington Institute, and he was asked by an American friend from the Institute, how can you explain that Bashar Assad is ready to challenge President Bush by sending Mujahideen to Iraq? Doesn't he understand that at the end, the United States will hit him? And the Syrian guy said, for Bashar Assad, sending Mujahideen to Iraq is win-win-win situation. How come? The first win, the Mujahideen going there, the Americans will kill them, good for me. They will kill a couple of Americans, good for me. At the end, President Bush will realize that he's not able to stabilize Iraq without me. This is a third win. Unfortunately, so far, Bashar Assad is right. He hasn't paid a significant price, not for sending Mujahideen to Iraq, not for equipping Hezbollah and using it against us, not for allowing Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PFLP, DFLP to be hosted in Damascus and to operate from Damascus. He hasn't paid any price for the assassination of Rafik Hariri, Jubran Twaini, and other Lebanese who rejected the Syrian presence and dominance in Lebanon. So far, he is right. This regime should be punished. And unfortunately, we didn't do it in the last war. Hezbollah should be disarmed. And the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel in Lebanon should pull out from Lebanese soil. For the sake of stability, not just for the State of Israel, for Jordan, for Egypt. I had the opportunity to meet King Abdullah more than a year ago. The whole discussion was about the Iranian threat. And he knew what he was talking about. He worried about his personal survivability because of Hezbollah, Hamas, other Iranian-backed activities in his kingdom. And Lebanon is a platform for Iran to operate in the Middle East, in our neighborhood. And we should encourage the Lebanese government and the Lebanese people to disarm Hezbollah and not to allow the Iranian presence in Lebanon. It is difficult to say today, after the last military campaign, which was mismanaged, unfortunately, by us, by our leadership. Having said that, when we go back to summer 2000, again, where was the West? Where was the United Nations organization? We pulled out from Lebanon to implement United Nations Security Council Resolution 425. The Lebanese government was not demanded to disarm Hezbollah. And when they faced international pressure, international support, they were able to pull out the Syrian troops from Lebanon without even a single shot. But we didn't face this kind of unification in the Western side, neither on May 2000 nor in the end of the military campaign, the last military campaign in Lebanon. And this is not the way to serve the Western interests. Another thing that should be done is promoting educational and political reforms in Arab and Islamic countries. It seems naive, I know, but I believe in it. I watch very carefully the Arab world since I was head of the intelligence in 1995, more than 10 years. In the last year, I had the opportunity here in Washington to meet Arabs, Iranians, what is called dissidents, those who want to embrace Western values, those who want to promote democratic values in their societies. And it is encouraging to see them in the last 5 years gaining more power, not enough, daring to express themselves, to criticize the regimes. Part of them are put in jail, like in Egypt, in Syria. Who could believe 3 years ago that the Lebanese people, as a civil society, will go out to demonstrate and to force Bashar Assad to pull his troops from Lebanon? Who could believe in it? And there are those elements in the Arab and Islamic world, those individuals and organizations who prefer the democratic Western values, who sanctify life and not death, who understand that this way of educating the young generation to become martyrs, suicide bombers, doesn't serve their interest. They do not believe that at the end they will gain happiness by having 72 virgins, as the Ayatollahs or the Imams, the Sheikhs, promise them. We should approach them. We should encourage them. We should empower them. At the end, and I feel like, in 37 years of military service, I was cutting the weeds. The roots are in the education system. And I will tell again and again that in summer 95, I warned Mr. Rabin, the Prime Minister, when I was head of the intelligence. In August 95, 2 months after I came to the head of the intelligence office, I told him, Mr. Prime Minister, I don't see any sign for reconciliation in the Palestinian side. I didn't have to use my sophisticated intelligence sources. I just had to open the Palestinian textbooks, denying the state of Israel, denying any linkage between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, promoting the ideas of jihad, of martyrdom. This is the key, to start with education. And it is a long process. And we are going to face a war of generation or generations. But we should promote, empower, and encourage those kind of values on the other side. And of course, in certain cases, we should condition any financial support to this kind of leadership by educational and political reforms. It is immoral to finance the Palestinian Authority, either those of Arafat or Abu Mazen today, or the Hamas-led Palestinian Authority. It is immoral, and this is not the way to fight this kind of war. Any financial support should be conditioned by this kind of reforms. Actually, I heard something very right about the financial support for this kind of leadership. It's taking money from the poor people of the rich countries, giving it to the rich people of the poor countries. Democratization is not just voting. It was a tremendous mistake to allow Hezbollah and Hamas to participate in the political process in Lebanon and the Palestinian Authority, respectively, without meeting the criteria of democracy. First of all, values, human rights, freedom of speech, disarmament, going to the ballots without bullets. In this situation, Israel shouldn't be pressed to give up territories, and Israel shouldn't initiate any unilateral withdrawal. As I said, the root of the conflict in the Middle East today is not what is called occupation. The Palestinian goal is not the construction of a Palestinian state in Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip, but the destruction of the state of Israel. What else should happen to convince naive Westerns, to include Israelis, that this is the case? Arafat initiated the war in September 2000 to avoid the two-state solution, to avoid the recognition of the state of Israel as a Jewish independent state. Hamas leaders declare again and again that the Palestinian goal is to have an Islamic state from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, min al-Bahr il al-Nahir, and we ignore it. Israel was attacked last summer from territories that we do not occupy anymore. The appeasement strategy failed. Any territorial concession today is perceived by the radical Islamist and any terrorist as a victory which encourages and inspires them to go on with their offense, jihad, against Israel and the West. In any future political arrangement, Israel should enjoy defensible borders. Without defensible borders, our neighbors will try again and again to attack us by all means: terror, rockets, conventional armed forces, and weapons of mass destruction. The two-state solution has been proven to be an irrelevant paradigm. The Palestinian leadership has proven its reluctance to recognize the state of Israel as a Jewish state and has failed to govern. We should look for a new paradigm to allow the Palestinian people better life and for the Israeli people more secured life. What else should be done? It would be better for the West not to be dependent on the Arab and Islamic oil producers. Today, the Chinese policy is based on oil considerations as regard to Iran. The United States is blackmailed by Saudi Arabia, which is blackmailed by Iran. We should find a replacement solution in order to be independent in the area of energy. To conclude, to my mind, the West is already engaged in World War III. We need a wake-up call to realize it. In order to defend our lives, our culture, our way of life, our values and interests from the radical Islamist offense, we need clarity, unification, and determination to fight back. I have learned that the best defense is a good offense. We should be proactive in all fields, in international politics as regards to this threat, economy, education, and in the military. We are on the course of inevitable global confrontation, which is the beginning of. We are stronger, we are just, and we have no choice but to fight in order to survive. It is up to us to decide when and how to fight and to win this war. Thank you.